Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to have you here. I think I will learn a lot, and I hope everybody watching will as well. Before we begin, I just want to also say my thanks to Dr. Frank Richter, who made this conversation possible. And I encourage everybody to take a look at Horasis.org. It's a great organization. Alan Hassenfeld, I just want to introduce you very briefly. I'm very pleased to have you here. You're a true global business leader. Currently, you're the executive chairman, the chairman of the executive committee, rather, of Hasbro, one of the largest toy makers in the world. You served as chairman of the company for just about 2 decades, from I believe 89 to 2008, and you were CEO for a good stretch as well. So there's a lot to learn, and I think we'll get through only a bit here today. But perhaps we can just start a little bit with your background and how you got to leading Hasbro and growing it in a tremendous way over such a long period of time.
John, first of all, thank you for having me. And you mentioned Horasis and Frank. I think that the group that Frank is beginning to put together to try and tackle some of the issues in the world is going to be very, very fascinating to watch. Hopefully we'll act and not just talk. As far as Hasbro is concerned, and you see the bright smile, anyone that deals with children and toys for the predominance of their career gets to be 90% of the time to think like a 7-year-old. So that's fun. How did I get there? I hate to say this, nepotism. I'm 3rd generation. It was my grandfather and his brothers, my father and his brother, and then myself and my brother. But regrettably, my brother passed away in 1989 when I took the leadership role, and I wasn't totally prepared. I was very fortunate. I had a great team around me, and the one major piece of advice is always have people that are smarter than you working with you. They can make you look very, very good.
Well, that's good advice, and probably more people should heed that who are in such positions. But you're being very humble, but obviously during your tenure, Hasbro was transformed and grew tremendously. And what I'm really hoping to learn from you is how you went about growing the company, building the brands, and really expanding globally, because that's the name of the game today. Is you've got to find new markets globally. Doesn't matter where your company is based, but I think opening new markets is key. If you could just tell us a little bit about.
Well, I think you have to go back a teeny bit in time, because really where we are today at Hasbro, and I mean present day, is because of some of the architecture that my brother had put into place, and I was passionate about as well. Number one, what we were able to do in our earlier successes was to take our profits and begin to try and buy up what I call evergreens in our business. And when I say evergreens, Monopoly, Cluedo, The Game of Life, Star Wars, Marvel. We kept on trying to create, like an investment banker, like a banker. What we wanted was a balanced portfolio of brands, but brands that could basically be global brands. And backing up for a minute, my start at the company really was more in the manufacturing sector, in the international sector. I spent the better part of the first decade of my business life living in the Far East and in Europe, beginning to, when I came into the business originally, back in the late 60s, and I hate to admit that, we were only about a $30-40 million company. And when I left, the day-to-day, we were about a $4 billion company. But the most important thing, even though we were not as successful in those days, I believed very much that I wanted Hasbro to be in the four corners of the world. And it really wasn't until, I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, that when we talk about the BRIC, whether it be Russia, whether it be Brazil, whether it be India, whether it be China, that we really invested heavily in those areas. Brian Goldner, who's the CEO presently, has really taken on that task. We've been doing business in Brazil for years, and in China for years, in India, not as much in Russia, but all of a sudden, all of the forces were beginning to align in our favor, in the sense there was beginning to be a real disposable income in those countries. There was beginning to be a critical mass of retailing in those countries. So if you were advertising, it was impactful. But I many times when I talk to college students today, I say to them, other than English, there are two very important languages. One is Spanish and the other is Mandarin. And I also say to people, there are huge opportunities, I think, in the global marketplace like never before, because they've never been tapped. But the other thing that I don't think my brother or I necessarily realized was in this world of social media, in this world of connectivity, when we were buying up intellectual property, we didn't really have the dreams that Al and then Brian have taken on, which was all of a sudden, it wasn't just the real world of a board game. It was that board game or that property. It could become a TV program. It could become a movie. It could be on cell phones. It could be on the internet. So all of a sudden, our world has absolutely mushroomed in the sense that there are so many places that we can put our content. And a lot of that wasn't necessarily ready, at the time that I stepped down. So the important thing for me, being the third generation, was not hanging on forever. Since I wasn't protecting the business, I turned it over to a very trusted and very capable person who had been with the company many years to almost mentor along with me the next generation of leadership, which would be outside the family. Fortunately, I passed the baton and it was accepted, and now Al has passed the baton and it's been very successful. But whenever you do regime change, transition, whatever, it's very difficult. But we were very, very, fortunate in the way we were able to have change happen at Hasbro. Is that a long answer?
That's great, and you alluded to it a little bit by saying all this content that we have, and you do have evergreen brands. I think people still view Hasbro as a toy company, but it's almost a content company, is it not, these days? And where, can you tell us a little bit about how the business model itself has evolved from perhaps, selling toys to all the different streams of revenue that are available today?
Well, everything's changed. I mean, I look at our customer base, I look at the global marketplace, and as we were talking about the world before we started to tape this morning, unless you're willing to take chances and make hard decisions, but good decisions, you don't get anywhere. And I think at Hasbro, one of the things that we realized was the entertainment, the world of social media, was coming at us at light speed, whether you're willing to, not willing to, but learning to sell through the internet, whether it's basically advertising through the internet. None of that was here 10 years ago. So when you talk about change, this is, you have to also be willing, if you're sitting in old clothes, to think new or make sure, as I started saying, find people that are not only tech savvy, but really understand a lot about what's going on today. And, one thing that has not changed for me, but at the same point is a concern for me, is that wherever we go in the world, Hasbro has been accepted because of relationships with people, honor, ethics. And I worry when I see everyone so glued to their BlackBerry, Crackberry, or, to their new Apple, 4S phone. And I hope we don't lose one very important sensitivity, and that's how we deal with other people. It's very hard to explain to this generation when I'm negotiating, whether it's overseas or in America, there's something when you shake hands with a person, in a person's handshake. There's something in the body language. There's something that the eyes tell you about other people. And sometimes whether you want to work with them or you don't want to work with them. So even with all of the great technology and all of the different platforms that we can take advantage of today, I hope people don't forget the human element of business, because it's very, very, very important. But anyway, going back to your original question about so many things have opened up for us. I can play Scrabble on my cell phone. I can play Scrabble on my iPad. I can play Scrabble on my computer. I can play Scrabble anywhere today. Or Monopoly. I mean, it's just amazing. And I'm sitting in a meeting the other day in Hong Kong, and I'm watching my co-chair sort of saying, I need help on this word for Scrabble, and you're supposed to be good. I'm sort of saying, Maria, shut the game down.
Yeah, well, it just seems like, I think back to my own childhood, and just the amount of things I consumed was a lot less in general than kids today. But everybody back then played Monopoly. It was our favorite game, and you couldn't, today it's still
different
the case,
today, John.
but yeah.
We're having to create quicker versions of Monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
A good Monopoly game would be an hour and a half, maybe. Risk could take 12, 14 hours to play. But people don't have that patience. And that's a concern for us. So, but we have to adopt. You can sort of rue that the old days have passed and you're in. If you want to be in business, just understand that things change and you have to change with them. If you're not willing to change, then you'll become like the buggy whip in the car and all of that.
Yeah, and I think the definition of what a toy is has really blurred. I mean, I have a 5-year-old son, and he really views his iPad as his toy and constantly asks for new apps and new games that he can put on there. And it's so intuitive for kids to just use their finger on that screen. Real toys become a little bit of oh yeah, I have that, it's on the shelf. But in terms of how much time they spend with, interacting with the screen, it's amazing.
Well, there's an old saying, the only difference between men and boys is the price of their toys. But going back to your 5-year-old, I agree that there are some incredible, what we call electronic toys. Is an iPad a toy? Yes, it's a toy for all of us. And we get lost in that world. My concern there is one, and I turn to the parents. And I'd say, look, part of growing up is socialization. How kids play with one another. How they react on whether it's the football pitch, whether it's on the tennis court, whether it's swimming, whatever. There's an important thing in how kids socialize with one another. It's how they're going to react to others in business in a latter day. One of the other things that I don't think you get, maybe you get in a video game, a certain amount of dexterity, as you're zapping everything. But one of the things at a younger age, a good toy does a couple of very, very important things. Number one, it helps in socialization. Number two, the most important thing of childhood, always remember that a child's work is a child's play. So when a child is playing, they're really working. And you're giving them with toys many times a chance to absolutely open up their imagination. Same you could say on an iPad or, on the computer. But the other thing is dexterity, that whole thing of shapes and sorting and colors and that. But look, we have to take the technology of today and we have to create playthings for whatever age that incorporate that, but also don't forget that a child is still a child. And, I think it was the Kaiser Family Foundation a year and a half ago did a study, and this will shock you. Kids today in America, 8 to 15-year-olds, we're spending over 10 and a half hours a day on social electronic media. And you can say, Alan, come on, they're in school, they're playing, they're doing that. No. And if you take out multitasking, multitasking is listening to your iPod while you're playing, you're zapping someone on a video game. It was 8 3/4 hours of between iPod, iPad, texting, cell phones, computers, video games, TV, all of the electronic, what we call white noise. And the question is, I don't know if we know yet, psychologically or whatever, sociologically, what that's really doing. Is there any harm in it? We know that hearing is beginning to become a problem because of all of the noise. Our kids who are bombarded with, again, the word that people have used, and I don't necessarily totally comprehend it, is white noise. If that's affecting sleep patterns in kids, we'll see. But for me, I still love throwing the Nerf football. I still love playing, my Nerf, games. I even like Play-Doh.
So as Hasbro, you're looking at this, and obviously you want to be a part of the market and go to where the customers are. Are you still acquiring intellectual property the way you did earlier? And if you are, what are you looking for?
I think that you're both still looking to acquire, but you do not acquire just for the sake of acquisition. As we have a saying in the toy business, technology for technology's sake is a loser. Because if you want to be innovative, you must make sure that what you're innovating, that people really want. So how do you combine, the technology and what people want? And again, one of the things is you must look all over the world, under every stone, for the next bright idea. It could come from Moldova, it could from Latvia, it could come from Australia. A lot of our work in the 80s, in early 90s was with Japanese anime. If you take Transformers probably was the third or second highest grossing movie in 2010. Where did we do the preview? in Moscow in Red Square. I mean, things are changing. It's like, it really is a global world. And, you know, I look and there are things that I don't understand yet that we're working on. If you take the apps that your 5-year-old wants, how do you make money? And I hate to talk about money, but you have to continue to take care of your people, your community, and that, and it's better to be profitable than to lose money, trust me. But how do you basically monetize some of these apps? Well, I think one of the things that Rovio has done with Angry Birds is basically they've gone on a licensing. You know, whether they're creating a theme park, whether it's clothing, whether it's this and that, that's where they're making money plus the advertising. But on the pure app, not yet. Now you go to Zynga, who, you know, is doing amazing things. And again, it's not totally something I comprehend, but you look at Farmville. Now, Farmville, in order where Zynga's making its money, is they have, I forget how many millions of hits a day, but it's only a small percentage that are basically buying in the virtual world. But people are buying in the virtual world cows for the farm, horses for the farm, and I started saying, what are they doing with these things? They're all in this virtual, and now you see the Sim Cities are coming, the Mafia Wars or whatever, you know, on different platforms where you're trying. We started some of this, believe it or not. Years ago, we bought something called Magic the Gathering, which is a spectacular, we bought a company actually called Wizards of the Coast, which makes Magic. But how did we take what we call a trading card game, a TCG, and make it into an online gaming, you know, phenomena? And it was very interesting because one of the most important things in a trading card game were the chase cards, the ones of rare. But when we went to Magic Online, people would buy the packs, you know, and they'd open up and you hear the sound and ka-ching of the money going through the credit card or whatever. But any cards that people bought in the virtual world, we held for them in the real world. So if they wanted to cash out, they were getting the cards in the real world. But it's a real, you have to understand that change is happening at light speed. I'm not sure where it's necessarily going, but there are better people than I, but it means you have to have partnerships. And you have to find good, bright people and be willing. My dad used to always say, more people die of indigestion than starvation, which also means pigs get led to slaughter. Learn to share. If you want everything for yourself, you might find yourself empty-handed someday. And I think the beauty of Hasbro and the beauty of really the family culture that still exists there is we're willing to share, and we'll cross all borders to find good partners.
And so I'm curious, in this new world of apps and digital content, are you then looking to partner with people like Rovio or Zynga or others that maybe have expertise in, let's say, apps or online games but don't have the
John, let me be
brands?
very blunt there. If we don't do it, somebody else will do it. And shame on us. So, with anyone that is good in this space, we should be communicating, talking, and if it's worthwhile for both parties, you have to find, you know, that mutual success factor for both. You better darn well believe we're looking.
Yeah, because I know, at least what I've heard, and some companies complain, is that the internet companies will say, well, you'll get all this exposure, but there really isn't much in the way of revenue right away anyway. You know, they can't make a commitment because they're just free plus then trying to sell, sort of a freemium model or something like that. So,
well, but now back up, because I think one of the things that Brian Goldner saw was we have been doing television shows on our content, whether it be My Little Pony, whether it be Transformers, whether it be G.I. Joe, Hound Puppies, I could go on, But one of the things that was beginning to happen was, who were we going to sell that programming to? Well, Disney, the Disney Channel, obviously one of the best. Disney likes its own content. And if it's your content, Disney likes to make sure that it's their content. Yes, we could go to Nickelodeon, but so too, Nickelodeon wants to do their own content. So it leaves really the third of the greats in programming in America was Cartoon Network. Mm-hmm. And yes, we can go to Cartoon Network, but everybody was rushing to Cartoon Network. So back 2.5 years ago, we agreed with Discovery Channel to become 50-50 partners and do the programming for Discovery Kids. And we named it The Hub. And today we're able to, on a global basis, because we're creating our own programming and content, very, very important, we now have an avenue where we're able to basically show our content properly, whether it's in America or whether we're basically doing transactions. I think we've sold programming from the Hub now into 47 countries. Very important because, again, people tend to gravitate, whether, the intellectuals like to agree or not, people tend to gravitate to what's current, what they see. Mm-hmm. So we decided that we really needed to do our own programming in our own partnership on a TV station.
And Discovery Kids now has how much distribution in the US? Is it widely available?
I don't actually, and I hate giving out numbers that I don't know. No, we're across America, mm-hmm. And we're working on basically certain cable transactions, mm-hmm. That, to get clearance and that. But we're doing, in the first 2 years, to be very blunt, we're beating our expectations. And at the same point in time, being realistic, it's helping very much the marketing of product.
Right. There's always been a tension between content and distribution and which is more valuable. What's your view on how that...
It's very simple. Yeah. The most important thing is content. Mm-hmm. You can always find a way to do distribution properly, again, if you're willing to share. But the one thing I believe that is irreplaceable is great content. And great content, there is not that much content that will necessarily span generations. We've been fortunate so far in that it's funny, and I shouldn't talk about my competitor, but I do respect them. And I think they were presenting a couple of years ago at a conference, and they talked about having 600 years of intellectual property. Barbie's over the hill, she's over 50, Hot Wheels, Matchbox, taking all of their names. Well, we have content that comes close to 5,000 to 6,000 years. And when I say that, The Game of Life, Lincoln Logs, Tinker Toys, how they have been able to span generations. We have to be careful, though, because if you take something like Angry Birds, is it a fad that will last 3 or 4 years, and what will replace it? Or will it stay on forever? And my feeling on some of these things is much content, even the new content of today. I look how long the Sim Cities, have held on, first through, computer games and now what they're planning on doing with it. The most important thing with intellectual property is you have to invest in that intellectual property to maintain it. It's not like intellectual property is an antique, in the sense that it's going to grow in value if it's a good antique. Intellectual property needs to be dusted off and made okuro.
Sort of like Toy Story gets new incarnations and the story evolves over time, right? Is that?
Yeah, I had to bring up Toy Story and Potato Head. We don't talk about Potato Head because
Okay.
Potato Head, in my 20 years, of running Hasbro, really, Potato Head always thought he was chairman and CEO. We had very difficult discussions.
Okay. So, when I look at Hasbro, it fits a lot of the criteria that a Warren Buffett would look for, because you have this moat around your brands. They're going to be around for a long time and people will be interested in them. Is that how you kind of think about building value for the company, to keep expanding this moat and
I think you have to continue to look for new brands that can be part of your portfolio. But again, as we started out, John, it was really the perfect opening. The world is really our oyster. If I look, Hasbro had we pre-announced our earnings because they were wonderful, but they were not necessarily totally up to expectations. And when I say totally up to expectations, they might have been up to some of our expectations, but sometimes analysts get ahead of you. It was probably our most profitable year ever. And volume-wise, it was, I think it was a record year for us. But in America, we didn't really grow. It was a tougher Christmas. The economy was different. But because we're investing our dollars now, in a lot of money in investment in Brazil. In Brazil, we didn't even have an office 3 years ago. We were taking revenue in from licensing. In just 2.5 years, we have a company that's doing close to $50 million, $60 million, and with a trajectory like this. In Russia. 2 years ago, we weren't in Russia. Today, we're in Russia. All of a sudden, we're doing $30, $40, $50 million. If you take China, I was in China back in 1984, 85. I opened a toy store in China. I was a pioneer. I wasn't successful, but now it's ready, and we're growing at leaps and bounds in China. So a great deal of our growth is not really coming from what was once the domestic market. My days, at Hasbro, we were really 65% domestic, 35% global. Today, if I take everything, all of a sudden we're close to maybe 51% domestic, 49% global. Mm-hmm. But, 10 years ago, people were saying kids are getting older, younger. Girls are too old for toys, but too young for boys. And we were being bombarded by the electronic age that was, happening. These international markets weren't open. Today, if I talk to a college student, gotta tell you, in our field of youth entertainment and toys, family entertainment, it's wide open. Number one, you have all of the different platforms to play on. You have the entire world to play on. It's really a very, very exciting time.
And I know personally, I spent my part of my youth in Croatia back when it was still part of Yugoslavia. And,
I'm so happy I didn't have to pronounce your full name.
Yeah,
It was a mouthful.
But I remember that there was everybody knew Western brands, and there was just such pent-up demand, but they just weren't available and the money wasn't there. But it seems like the minute you open up those markets, people already know the brands.
Well,
right?
People know the brands, and people are even, first of all, the young people, they know so much more than we do. They're all over the place on the internet, all over the world today. They're communicating, they're talking, and if we ever put a toy out, forget what adults think. The if the peer-to-peer pressure on kids, if they give a bad rating on a toy, God forbid, we are in trouble, because it spreads like everything else, over the internet. It's like wildfire. But what's happened in many of the countries that we've mentioned, especially in what was the old Eastern Europe, if you talk about Croatia, if you talk about Serbia, Montenegro, if you talk about Poland and Hungary and Romania, and I apologize, whatever country I'm forgetting, I'm not really forgetting, but we needed help. You need partners. And when I say that, many years ago when I first was dealing, I'd meet with the buyers of state-owned companies from Eastern Europe, and it was very dogmatic, and there was no distribution. Now when you have the Metros and the Carrefours and the Tescos and all people that we deal with more and more on a global basis, now we have a critical mass, as I talked about earlier, of retailing. Once you have a critical mass of retailing, you also have a way of advertising, in bringing your brands to life, but in a different way. So the pent-up demand has always been there, but the way to reach the markets was never very easy. Now, so many barriers are breaking down. I know there are a lot of people that, there are problems with globalization today. I happen, for our industry so far, it really has been, for me, breathtaking as far as how we, because of globalization, true globalization, been able to expand. And that's why I'm smiling and I like our future.
And you mentioned China a bit, and I'm just curious about the opportunity you see there. Obviously, has it been a place where you produce some of the toys, or partners do that?
Well, first of all, 70% of the world's toy production, some people use the number of 80%, I don't know what the exact number is, actually are produced in China, believe it or not. Hasbro produces in that range there, but we also have factories still in Massachusetts, the board game factory in Milton Bradley, and we also have a factory in Waterford, Ireland. Both very competitive and wonderful. But we've been producing in China. I laugh when I hear the rhetoric of jobs leaving America. The toy industry left America in the 60s, or began its migration to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and then crossing with Hong Kong partners into China in the very late 80s is when it really began to take off. Again, I talk about relationships. The most important thing in China, it's a very special word, it's called gongxi, and I'm probably pronouncing the word wrong. It's relationships. About 70% of what Hasbro buys out of China today is with people that we started, and I started working with over 30 years ago. Now, they all complain that they don't make money, but 30 years of working together, I laugh because I was in Hong Kong last week at a reception we were holding, and I turned to the people and I said, this is a unique evening. We have some of our retail partners here, and we have many of our manufacturing partners here. My manufacturing partners tell me we're too cheap and we negotiate too hard. My retail partners tell me we're too expensive. And so I laugh because manufacturers don't make money, the brands don't make money, and the retailers don't make money. I'm trying to figure out who does really make money in this whole thing. China I love. I spent a lot of time there. I respect the Chinese greatly, and they have been very helpful because one of the things is you become a senior statesman in your industry, which I've been accorded that role because we have crossed all borders, is I now run a co-chair a human rights project for the factory workers in our sector. We have about 1.5 million to 2 million factory workers under the code. We still have many issues, but I'm so proud in the 5 years that we've really been in existence, that we've really raised the bar on the treatment of the factory workers, because whether you're doing an app, in a back room somewhere, or you're making a toy, no one wants to buy something, even whether it's clothing or jewelry, made with blood, sweat, and tears. And therefore, Hasbro and I have taken a major, step in trying to bring the worldwide toy industry under this code. The ICTICURE code is different than any other of the codes because we're all inclusive. It's one world, one standard. It's got all of the toy associations involved, all 24 countries that have toy associations. But more importantly, we realized unless you get the brands, the retailers, and the manufacturers in the same tent, nothing will work in the long run. And so we're all part of this. Do we have many issues that we need to make better? Yes. But boy, oh boy, if someone said to me, what are you proudest of? I'm so proud of what we've done for the industry in general on this. And I'm so proud of the children's hospital that we built.
In China or where?
No, we have in our home, which is Rhode Island, North Pole, we call it. We have the Hasbro Children's Hospital. And then because my family's work all over the world, we are now, my mother came to me and said, look, you put women's centers in the Afghanistan, you put women's centers in the Darfur to create, literacy skills, to give skill sets for people, microfinancing and healthcare. And she said, look, you do a wonderful program on coexistence in Jerusalem. You have your human rights program in China. But there are 50 million Americans, at last count, living below the poverty line. We think that you should spend a little bit more of your time focused on alleviating the dire need in America. So our first commitment is to build the Hassenfeld Children's Hospital in New York City. There is actually no dedicated children's hospital from the foot of Wall Street up to 120th Street in New York. Each of the hospitals, and they're great hospitals in New York, have pediatric and specialties and do a wonderful job. But we decided that we wanted to have a hospital dedicated to children, and so we've partnered with NYU Langone. So Hasbro, the company, has got to be successful, so I pay off the debts of this huge commitment, that my family's made. But talking just very quickly about giving back and philanthropy, because it's very important. But I'm one of those that for a company, we've always had the business of business is business. No. The business of business is make sure the business continues. And being a good corporate citizen is seeding the field for the future. But I really think, and I didn't coin the word, but I believe in what's called Number one, tangential philanthropy. And tangential philanthropy is, for Hasbro, it's easy. We deal with children and family. So we're giving back to children and to families. I also believe that companies should employ what I call the triple threat. Gift in kind, philanthropic giving, but also encouraging your employees, your people, to basically volunteer. And so Hasbro has a program, and we were one of the first, because it was set up under my regime, 4 hours per month paid to do volunteer work in the community.
That's great, and I think, I sort of sense the difference between a company that has the kind of family background and tradition that Hasbro has, that makes you think for the long term, and a lot of other companies where there really is a separation of ownership and management, and you have these agency problems and a lot of short-term thinking going on. I just think of what happened with Wall Street and the banks. They were on the verge of going under, and they're still not really willing to curb themselves in ways that will prevent that from happening again, probably because in the short term it hurts profits. So how do we, and now we're going on to bigger topics a little bit, but there seems to be some inherent flaws in how some of these large corporations are run or set up, that they may not be run for the long term. And what do you think of that? Is that a big problem?
It's a huge problem. First of all, if I had my druthers and I could figure out how to do it, I'd like to separate industry from the corporate world, because when we think of the corporate world, in many cases you think of the hedge funds, you think of the investment bankers, you think of the banks, you think of the lending companies, the mortgage companies, and that. We're people that create jobs in industry, and it's through innovation. So I have a bitterness right now, and I don't think it's over. I don't think they get it. Gandhi once said, and it's a wonderful quote, "There is enough in this world for human need, but not enough in this world for human greed." And I think that whether you're the CEO or the chairman, and I think boards are partly responsible, boards have got to begin to wake up and make the tough decisions and have a heart. But at the same point in time, people are overcompensated. The divide, the 91 versus 1, I understand what the 99 is all about. I'm probably part of the 1% because of the success, that the company has had, but I think more of the social inequities in realizing that this is not going away, and if we don't do something about it, there's going to be trouble in the streets. My only advice to people that become CEOs and chairmen, I think the Danes have a quote, "The fish rots from the head," or someone has a quote like that, and what it really means is many times people speak nice words, but their eyes and their heart aren't there. And people understand, if you have to read a speech about doing the right thing rather than talking from your heart, something's wrong. And I can tell you right now, things are still wrong because people don't have the heart. And I use the word heart. We need to create a caring community. If Hasbro, if my company is going to survive, we need a caring world. I will also tell you that I am disappointed because I think that you're going to see it again. All of the, in theory, America's doing a little bit better. Maybe the real estate is beginning to pick up. Scotia just a little bit. maybe the banks are easing up a little bit on credit. I'm still very, very wary because I see and know that people are packaging things again. There's something called payday lending for the poor. I mean, some people are paying 50, 60, 70, 80%. Look in China. Okay, they're packaging some of that bad real estate debt. Maybe they're not calling it a CDO, but I know that part of that debt is being offloaded now. Okay, what's going to happen there? So I don't know how to teach an old dog new tricks, but that old dog might get shot if we don't wake up, because trust me when I say the street is alive with the sound of dissent, and it's a scary time.
It seems like there's a lot of dissent in the streets, and people are saying, well, get some of these problems solved. You know, the deficits can't go on forever. You can't keep increasing the debt forever. There's some real big things, but then when it comes to actually electing the folks who will get it done, those guys don't even run for office perhaps, and certainly don't get elected. So it just seems like the society is set up for only dealing with crises. Something has to blow up and then people deal with it, but to deal with a problem that's a little bit longer term, it just doesn't seem to happen. And I wonder how, what needs to be done to change that.
Well, first of all, there are old adages about getting to the cliff, and that's when you begin to realize, I think we've fallen off the cliff already. And I don't mean, it's not that, obviously I'm an optimist, but now I'm going to sound like a pessimist. We have political gridlock around the world, okay? But especially in my country, in America, it's never been like this. You have these and people that are basically cowards, because for years we kicked the can down the road. Now we not only have federal deficits, but you cannot imagine the deficits in the states and in the municipalities. And so we have to deal with the debt because we can't continue to add it when there's no more money. You can say, well, Alan, you can increase taxes on the wealthy. I have no problem, until it becomes too onerous. And what I've heard people say is not too onerous. If we have to go back, we who have been successful have got to give back more. I'm not saying Warren Buffett's thing is right or this and that. Warren should pay at the normal rate that I pay at and stop, carried in, sure, carried interest, tax it. Okay, I don't want to tax, I'm not a tax person, but at the same point in time, you have to increase the revenue, but you also have to cut some of the spending. Now, I believe in a country like America. I could go with you to Washington as long as we threw out every lobbyist and we could cut $4 to $5 trillion. Where I am upset with Obama, and I make no bones about it, we had a great roadmap that was bipartisan in Simpson Bowles. Why he impaneled them and then didn't take their advice has pushed us down 2 years. So we come back and we have the super committee, and they're incompetent and impotent. And excuse my passion on this. You have Grover Norquist, no tax increases, a pledge of 86. Guys, everybody is going, if you were going to make change happen, everybody is going to have to share the pain. We're watching our middle class get wiped out. There's $1 trillion or more in college debt for either students or graduates right now in America. College tuitions are going up every year. Come on, colleges? Why are you increasing 5 or 6%? You're doing research, you want more money, you want this and that. are you turning out the right student by making sure that teaching is the most important thing? Because I'm passionate that too often we're forgetting at the universities the most important constituency. It's not the alumni, it's not the people that give the money, it's our students. And it's for our students that we're creating a very, very bad future. Not only with the debt load, but with the absolute gridlock. And the last thing I'll say about government, because I can go on forever, as you can see I have no passion on this, I like to say, look, when you don't make laws, and we don't know, when businesses do not know where government's coming from, government in one way makes us impotent. If we're impotent, we don't create jobs. If we know what the law is, even if we don't like it, we'll find a way around it. No, we'll find a way of working within it. And that's how we create. But right now, real hardcore businesses, forget the apps and all of that, which is very exciting, but we're confused. Where is the world's leadership? The Euro crisis, the debt crisis here. Look, I wouldn't want to be a 20-year-old in Spain that's got 48% unemployment of 18 to 25-year-olds. I wouldn't want to be in Greece. I think the Greeks that don't pay their taxes should be shot. I think the Italians that avoid taxes should be shot. I think the Americans that avoid or have every tax shelter in the world. If those of us that call America great, then pay your fair share. And stop finding every loophole to get around it, because all we're doing is creating a greater chasm, and that chasm is about ready to erupt. Wow.
Wow.
I'm sorry. You don't have to agree with me, John. It's just, I'm seeing too much in my travels.
Well, let me ask you on the flip side of this, in the last year has also been one of the most amazing in terms of how many people have moved from living under a dictator to at least having a chance at some freedom, and that's been made possible by a lot of the new technologies and all of that. So
look, it was we're sitting here, it's just a year ago that the Jasmine Revolution began in Tunisia and spread to Egypt, and I was smiling because a year ago at the Horasis meeting, we were sitting, and it was the first day of Tahrir Square. Mm-hmm. And this morning, I read in the newspaper, it's the first day of the new Egyptian parliament. Whether it's Muslim Brotherhood or not, we all have to learn, to work together. So that's been wonderful. But on the other hand, you have, and I don't live there, I don't know, it's very hard to try and explain to Americans, don't put your values on other societies unless you really understand that culture. Mm-hmm. And whenever I'm working around the world, and I do it all over, the view that I take is, if you want to change something, you must do it from the inside, not by scaling the wall and forcing your views on everyone else. I think we're much better off because of the Jasmine Revolution. The question is how that populist movement will spread. I have it's very interesting to watch 50,000 people demonstrate in Russia. I'm very scared of the incredible corruption that we find, whether in America with campaign finance in the games that are being played. I hope they let me back in the country. But the incredible corruption, whether it be in Pakistan, whether it be in India, but that we see, and the people are getting tired of the petty bureaucracies and the skimming that goes on. And that's why the pot's boiling. People are tired of the same old, and nothing is coming down to them. I have a wonderful program in Thailand. I work with Kunlichai on poverty eradication, and I know this is a little bit off, but we're able to take whole villages out of poverty. And you see, in the Western world, we think of the individual. Thailand's very unique. It's Buddhist. And so they think of the whole. Mm-hmm. So we take a whole village of maybe 300 people. They have to agree on what we're going to do together. We help them. We give them the skill sets. And whole villages are coming out of poverty. How do we get people to work together and not, not everyone trying to figure out how do I put something in my pocket? But I'm very encouraged about what happened in Myanmar, in Burma, and the seemingly beginning, I say seemingly beginning, with Aung San Suu Kyi and what's going on there, and a lot of the original dissidents being released, from prison. I was happy at the election in Taiwan, but remember, this is a very sensitive year. You have regime change coming in China. You have elections in Russia. You have elections in France. You have elections in America. You have elections, I think, in South Korea. You have elections in Venezuela. There's a lot of, not turmoil, but in an election year, very strange things happen. Promises are made and not kept, and people, create gridlock so one party doesn't get up on the other. I'm very worried about this global gridlock because unless we face, today's the first day of the future, and unless we face it now, every day that we wait, the problems are basically multiplying.
And what is your view on China and whether they have a hard landing or what happens there?
Part of this whole thing about China and China's hard landing partly is going to depend on what we do in the Western world. Because, China does do a huge amount of manufacturing, for both Europe and the United States, as we know, and we see the numbers and all of that. If our economies continue, if we continue to spin without direction, China will begin to have a problem. One of the things I don't know, in theory, the inflation rate in China right now is about, I think 4.1% is the last thing that I read. However, food inflation is 8 to 10%. What's the real number? What's in that basket? Yes, real estate prices might be coming down because there is going to be, a bubble that bursts there. Not in the sense that, prices go down much further because they've already come down a lot, but so much of the debt in China was like in America, the overbuilding. But the difference between Hong Kong and China is many of the Hong Kong property companies have maybe 20%, if that, on their books. Many of these Chinese companies have like 100%. And because the banks weren't lending, or the government, rightly so, had tightened up, there was a lot of private lending that was going on. I mean, I think the epitome of it was Ren Zhao. We kept on hearing about people trying to fly without, I shouldn't, that's not funny, that were committing suicide because they had no way to pay off debt because they borrowed at 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%, interest rates, and unless you make it quickly, you can't survive with that. I think also, and again, I don't know enough about China. I mean, look, putting American values, on China is very hard because they have 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion people. You also have to understand that China, probably 250 million don't have jobs. So the Chinese are doing anything they can to move industries like mine further north, where there's more labor rather than migrant labor, trying to move the factories to where the labor is. But I think that many of the things that Beijing is doing is right, but like America, I hate to say this because, Washington might create federal laws, but the states basically thumb their nose at some of those federal laws. So too what happens in the provinces. Remember, China is at least 36 provinces, and then you get down to the cities and towns. You keep hearing about these land grabs by a provincial leader, which has led to the demonstrations a month ago in Wuhan, where the whole village of 20,000 basically protested, and finally Beijing had to intercede. China's very interesting. They don't want you to criticize them and for them to use, and I think the word's mélanger, which is face. However, if you do it with the government quietly, behind the scenes, you can basically be a lot more helpful than embarrassing people. None of us. I don't like to be embarrassed in public. If you tell me I'm doing something wrong, don't scream at me with other people. Do it quietly, one-on-one, and that's a lesson learned. And I know that sounds funny, but it's the truth. So where China is concerned, I worry about inflation. I worry about us in the world. Are we still in recession? Are we out of recession? Are we going to limp along? I worry about the property, but most I worry about the street as well in China. In 2010, there were 180,000 recorded demonstrations. Now, do I know if it was 1 people or 10,000 people? No, I don't know. But China's got to be careful, okay? Because China's got a huge load to manage, but they have to understand that the people are equipped with something that we never knew 10 years ago, and that's the connectivity. You can try and block connectivity, to the websites and the internet, but you can't do it totally. We're finding ways of going around everything. So I don't know, honestly. China basically can help itself, but part of the equation, which is us in Europe, isn't there.
Some say that if Tiananmen Square had happened in 2011 versus when it did,
1989,
it could have turned out very differently, given if you had connectivity and the ability to post things on YouTube and to, rally people. Although, maybe in China
it might have been different.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would have been different. Would the outcomes have been different? Maybe. I think it would have been much, 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 much bloodier. I also have a rule. I don't like living in the past, because if we live in the past, we're not creating the future. And we need all of our energies today to create the future.
On that note, what's your focus? I know you're leading a session at the Horasis annual meeting, and what, perhaps not solutions, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what questions are you most interested in?
I wish I had the solutions. The first part is on what are the risks that we as a global community in this world of connectivity face over the next 12 months. And what are the economic, and the second part of that question is what are the economic impacts? Let's just say I'm still working on that because I'm trying to find the positive. The risks are huge. And the greatest risk that we all face is the populist movement, which is right, but where it's going to go. Because as I say, the forest is tinder dry, and the wrong spark could create something that could spiral out of control. And when I say the spark, if you look at what happened in Oakland or in London, we watched the connectivity, and it wasn't, there were things that people were protesting, but then there was the fringe group of anarchists who really weren't worried about what the protests were doing. They wanted anarchy, and they wanted to steal for the sake of it. It takes that, it's only that little spark. Okay, look, it was in Tunisia, to bring things almost full circle. In Tunisia, it was a food vendor who was being berated by a female police officer, and then his denial of his rights that basically made him immolate himself. So I want to be careful tomorrow as I talk, because I worry about the younger generation more than anybody knows, because what type of world is my generation passing to them? A lot of debt, a lot of unanswered questions. Yes, it's been an era of great medical advancement, scientific advancement, technological advancement, but a great, I think, degradation of humanity. So all of these wonderful things that we've created, have we done it at the expense of humanity? And so, as I talk tomorrow, the risk is obviously the political gridlock. I'll talk about a leadership world, a leaderless world, in the sense that wherever you look, there are not, some of the strong leaders who would not make everybody happy, but they would make decisions. We need definitive decisions, and then we all have to be willing to share the pain, both the public sector and the private sector. So there are a lot of issues, and obviously there's turmoil in the world, the risks. Today we see the European Union agreeing to basically begin to put more pressure on oil imports from Iran. The Ayatollahs have basically said, if you put too much pressure on us, we'll close the Straits of Hormuz. Would they do it? I don't know. I just know that whatever we think they're going to do, they'll probably do the opposite. What about the new regime in North Korea? Who are they? What's it really going to mean? We know nothing about North Korea, in the sense, the few glimpses that I get of North Korea, I'm told that the famine, the poverty, we see the wonderful pictures on TV of the military parades and but I don't know. So I have real concerns, of the world. We're seeing in India protests for the first time that are not one caste versus another, but castes coming together to protest. I'm worried about the constant rise of fundamental religion, whether it's fundamental Judaism, whether it's fundamental Catholicism, whether it's fundamental Islam. It's not helping. I don't believe it's helping, because to solve the issues we have today, we all have to sit in dialogue and find a way out. We all have to compromise. Wow, okay?
Wow. That's, I appreciate all the risks and the problems that we face. I tend to be a little more optimistic, probably because I'm young, so don't have the context that you have, but just if I think of some of the things that have happened in the past, it just seems like they're a lot worse than what we're dealing with. I mean, we're dealing with debt, but this is, debt, and maybe you can help me understand this a little bit better, because if you have a debt, somebody has an asset, so we don't know, as a world, we don't owe this money to Mars or somebody else. This is debt that's held by others in the world, and so
if there's debt in the world, how do we?
Kind of it's a monetary, it's a financial problem, but fundamentally, it shouldn't be something that cannot be solved, because it is, these are book entries in a sense.
No, I think the system that we have today, look, there's great wealth in all the new Stalins, whether it's Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, the mineral rights and all that. But who controls it? Who's making the money? It's those that are close to the top. We look at and we laugh at the oligarchs. We don't laugh at them. We love them, right? I'm watching in wherever I go in the world. My wife says to me, and it's very true, God gave you 2 ears to listen with and not to talk with. There's a huge amount of money moving from Russia out. Why? But of that huge wealthy group that probably, I'm not saying they didn't work hard, because I don't know them, I don't know anything, I'm not a Russian pile. In China, a lot of people trying to get their money out. Buying real estate here, buying it there, until the very top gets it. Okay, you're not going to relieve the debt problems, because what they're doing is they're making money on the back of the poor. And that's the 1%. And that's why the 99 versus 1 is not wrong. Maybe if it's organized well and done properly, Occupy is right. Maybe Occupy is the messenger of the future, to try and get people to share a little bit more.
It just seems like we have a human problem, which is that
we do.
For most people, there's never enough.
Well, that's the real question. What is enough? How much is enough? And I guarantee people one thing. You come into this world with nothing, and you leave this world with one thing: your name. And I wish people understood. For me, name is having a good name is very important. I don't believe anyone has been able to find how you can take it with you. If they do, let me know. I might change my views. But anyway, you can't take it with you. And I laugh at people that, and I mean this, I laugh at people that say, look, I've worked hard all my life. When I die, I'm going to give it to this charity. Don't be stupid. First day of the future is now. Give now. Trust me, giving now and being involved in what you're giving to will bring a smile to your heart, and you'll live a lot longer.
Yeah, I agree with that, and let us end on that note then. And I've learned a lot. I thank you very much.
But don't get me wrong. I'm positive in the sense that if we are willing to give up and all come together, everyone's got to be a part of the solution. I'll end it with and this isn't nice. You'll probably cut it out anyway of the interview, but there's sort of an Arab proverb where you want all the camels within the tent. Because if there's one camel outside peeing in, it's very messy. So we've got to, everybody, including the oligarchs and the wealthy in India and the wealthy in America, we have to give up to get. Because otherwise, all that we have made is going to become very tenuous. And look, with technology and connectivity, there is a bright world out there. but we've got to level the playing field a lot more and give people a chance.
Alan, thank you very much. We could talk for hours. We have only this time that we've had, but we've learned a lot, and I really appreciate it.